When Germany invaded Belgium in August 1914, roughly one-sixth of Belgium's population, about 1.5 million people, was forced to flee their homeland. Of this massive wave of refugees, 250,000 headed to Britain, making it the largest single influx of refugees in British history to that date. These refugees arrived at British ports like Dover, Harwich, Tilbury, and Grimsby after grueling sea journeys that lasted for days. Among them were civilians, wounded soldiers, and discharged Belgian troops, as well as artists, craftsmen, and workers. Many arrived with nothing but the clothes on their backs, having lost everything they'd left behind. Initially, British public opinion embraced these refugees as representatives of brave little Belgium. The royal family, aristocracy, and ordinary citizens showed remarkable solidarity. About a third of the refugees settled in London and its surroundings, while the rest were distributed across the country. Most stayed as lodgers with British families, while others were housed in temporary camps. The most unique example of this refugee experience was the town of Elizabethville, established near Birtley in County Durham. During David Lloyd George's time as Minister of Munitions, this special project was launched to meet the workforce needs of munitions factories built by Armstrong Whitworth to address the growing demand for artillery shells. Named after Queen Elizabeth of Belgium, this town was designed as a truly sovereign Belgian settlement on British territory. Home to over 6,000 Belgians, Elizabethville operated under Belgian law, traded in Belgian francs, and conducted business in Flemish and French. This unique community had its own gendarmerie, post office, school, hospital, church, and even cemetery. The town was designed according to modern urban planning principles, featuring wide streets and open spaces. Families lived in prefab wooden huts, equipped with what were considered luxuries of the time, running water and flush toilets. Single men were housed in centrally heated barracks. Social facilities included a school with a capacity for 700 students, a 100-bed hospital, and a canteen serving 1,200 people, alongside cinema, theater clubs, and sports activities. Belgium's pre-war position as a leader in European arms manufacturing meant there were skilled munitions workers available. Belgian workers at the Elizabethville factory exceeded their target of 1 million shells, producing 1.5 million. However, working conditions were quite harsh: 12-hour shifts with only 2 half-hour breaks, and military-style discipline was enforced. Interestingly, unlike their British female counterparts, Belgian women weren't allowed to work in the factory. Instead, they took on roles in other services around the town. This showed how cultural differences played out even in the workplace. Elizabethville was separated from the village of Birtley by fences with only a few entry gates. This isolation was partly for security reasons. The existence of this factory, crucial to the war effort, needed to be kept secret, but it also prevented mixing between the Belgians and local people. Over time, feelings of resentment began to develop among locals. Birtley residents could see that the Belgians had better living conditions than they did, and this caused friction. Belgian men had to wear military uniforms to enter British pubs and needed permission to leave the compound. This situation reflected the broader experience of Belgian refugees across Britain. Initially seen as unfortunate representatives of poor little Belgium, the refugees began to be viewed differently as the war dragged on and economic hardships increased. The perception that Belgians were watching the war from a safe distance while British men fought on the front lines created public unease. After the armistice on November 11, 1918, Belgians began returning home. By the end of 1919, more than 90% of the refugees had returned to Belgium. This rapid departure didn't give them much chance to leave a lasting legacy, despite 4 years together. After the Belgians left, the town of Elizabethville housed the expanding population of Birtley. Belgian street names were replaced with English ones, and the name Elizabethville faded into history. Today, only a few structures remain from the original town: an old shop, hospital building, part of the factory, and a cemetery with numerous Belgian gravestones. The Belgian refugee experience in Britain represents an important example in modern refugee history. From the initial enthusiastic welcome to changing public opinion, from isolation to integration, from temporary shelter to permanent settlements, this experience encompassed many dynamics and offered valuable lessons for future refugee crises. The Elizabethville example showed that alternative models for refugee integration were possible. Though temporary, this town functioned as a completely separate community and demonstrated that different approaches to refugee policy deserve consideration. This is a common call-to-action phrase that YouTubers and content creators use to encourage viewer engagement on their videos. The Belgian refugee experience in Britain represents an important example in modern refugee history. From the initial enthusiastic welcome to changing public opinion, from isolation to integration, from temporary shelter to permanent settlements, this experience encompassed many dynamics and offered valuable lessons for future refugee crises. The Elizabethville example showed that alternative models for refugee integration were possible. Though temporary, this town functioned as a completely separate community and demonstrated that different approaches to refugee policy deserve consideration. This is a common call-to-action phrase that YouTubers and content creators use to encourage viewer engagement on their videos.